Mute. There we are. Running low, need a cord real quick.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Always a couple of technical AV issues to work out at the beginning of a meeting. We have a few people online as well as a couple of dozen people here in the room, so welcome. This is our town hall meeting for the fiscal 23 budget. Those that are online, you're free to submit a question. You're free to submit a question through that feature on the website. We'll get to that at the end of the session. Those that are here in person, you're welcome to ask questions at the end. Just come up to the owl so we can hear and see you online. You know, every year the budget seems like we're always dealing with some type of challenge or issue that's coming up. We always kind of have some type of theme to the budget, and this year's, as you see on the screen, is the impacts of inflation, wages, and of course the renovation. We're going to talk a little bit more about the impacts of all three of those items. So first and foremost, the most important thing with our budget is that we're budgeting to the mission and that the budget isn't driving the mission. We talk about that all the time, but I think it's important to remember that. Our vision and mission statement are vitally important, as are our core values, which are up on the screen. So the budgeting process, it's a lengthy one and a detailed one. We start this process a couple of months ago where the department heads go through and create their departmental budgets and their assumptions based on the coming year. This year, obviously, we have some assumptions based on the renovations that we'll talk about. From there, the department heads meet with myself and Donna Pavin, who I should say is our new CFO. Donna. They meet, the department heads meet with us so that we can go through every line item of the budget. And I was thinking before the meeting to give the members an appreciation of how detailed our budgets are. I went through and counted up all the different line items within our budget. So when the finance committee and the board do their review, they're looking at over 2,000 individual line items and detail of line items, 2,090 to be exact. In addition to that, when the management team is working, they're going through all of the payroll budgets. That has a total of 639 line items when you look at payroll, benefits, and taxes and all that fun stuff. In food and beverage, Joe should be commended. In food and beverage, we have a very complex budget spreadsheet that takes into account everything from every shift for every meal period, right down to how many covers we're projecting to serve, how many servers it's going to take to serve that, busboys, all of that information goes into the spreadsheet that has 657 line items. So what you'll see today is a high-level summary of over 3,300 line items. So after management does its job, we present the budget package to the finance committee. We had a workshop with the finance committee on July 21st. They received the budget about a week before that meeting. This year's meeting was 5 hours. It was very extensive and thorough. I'll say that in a good way. Then a week later, the board of directors has their workshop. They received the budget a week prior, so they receive it shortly after the finance committee has blessed it. This year's session had a much higher focus on the renovation than the detailed operational budget. Some of you probably attended that meeting or saw it online. That was held on July 28th, and that still lives on YouTube. You can see that on YouTube. Here we are today at the town hall meeting. And then finally, the board approves the budget at the end of this month on August 26th. You can see on the screen there's a large number of members that are team members and members that are involved in the budgeting process. We've got the management team listed, the finance committee, and the board of directors. So we always start with our general assumptions. So these are our high-level assumptions that are going to guide us through the budgeting process. So this year, we're taking into account the assumption that the renovation as it's been presented is going to be approved. Now, if it's not approved, we obviously have a backup plan, and I'll talk about that later in the presentation. So with that assumption, we have a decrease in golf revenues in golf operations, obviously, because we're going to shut down the golf course April 3rd. So we have a significant amount of lost golf revenue in the month of April, and then of course some in May, and not as much, but through the summer months. A lot of this is offset by the fact that Mark isn't going to be doing his normal summer practices on the golf course, which do have a substantial cost associated. We'll also have a decreased expense, assuming that the pool closed in mid-February and that the bistro closes at some point in April. So when the management team put the budget together, these are kind of the parameters that they used as they created the budget. So there's three very high-level impacts to the budget that I mentioned on that first slide in the presentation. I'll talk about all three of those in some more detail. So the first is the golf course and the bistro renovations. So you can see the net effect of closing down the golf course on April 3rd is about $135,000. That's essentially an additional subsidy to the dues. We show a loss of just over $300,000 in cart and green fees. We will obviously not have summer members next summer, and that comes to about $80,000. A lot of that's offset because of operational savings. Like I said, we have operational savings in payroll, golf course maintenance practices, and so on, just within the golf maintenance, golf operations budgets. So the net effect of that is an additional subsidy of about $135,000 within the area of golf. Closing down the bistro isn't going to have much of a financial impact because the bistro typically closes in the summer anyway. It'll close a little bit earlier, but all of those operations will move upstairs to the grill and dining room. The second big impact to this budget is the labor market. You can see there, this budget has $224,000 of an increase in wages. That is a 3% increase for all employees, and there's an additional 2.2% increase in wages for select wage adjustments to remain competitive. A lot of those wage adjustments are for hourly employees, kind of at the $12, $13, $14 an hour range, where we need to get those individuals up to $14, $15, $16. So there's a big impact in the labor intensive departments. So that's going to be in food and beverage, golf course maintenance, golf operations. That's where you're going to see the biggest impact. Eric's outside staff, a lot of those individuals that may have been at the $10, $11 an hour mark, we have to get those wages up. So the total increase in wages is 5.2%. Again, the 3% is across the board. The 2.2 is for select individuals. I made a note in there that the current COLA, 2022 COLA cost of living adjustment is 5.9%. So we're not even quite hitting that target of 5.9. But at 5.2, we feel that we can compensate the staff that we need to. And as we did last year, there are times where throughout the year, we have to make compensation adjustments to be able to retain individuals. The third is inflation. So inflation is a little bit harder to quantify. So what I did is part of our budgeting practice, we took specific line items where we could see year over year the impact of inflation on utilities specifically. So that's electric, water, trash removal, as well as some operating supplies, linens, paper products, and paper products this year are essentially double what we were paying in prior years. Chemical and fertilizer, and of course, fuel and propane. So these inflationary impacts, like I said, are difficult to quantify. I'm just taking these items, but if you look at the US inflation at last month, it was 9.1%. Yesterday it came out at 8.5%. That 145,000 is pretty understated when you look at the whole budget because inflation affects everything. The last item, not as big of an impact, but it is a 15% increase in our property and casualty insurance. So that increased by about $38,000. We worked with Joe Morsey, one of our members, to to every year as we update our insurance program. He's a huge help. Initially with the broker, we were thinking it may be in the range of 25 to 30% increase. So we were glad, unfortunately, to see a 15% increase in this one line item. So what's on the screen is a summary of those impacts. So those 4 significant line items that I mentioned total about $550,000, just those 4 areas. It's about $680 per member for fiscal year 23. So in order to offset that type of an increase, we were very aggressive, and those that are on the finance committee on the board heard me say very aggressive, probably at least a dozen times during our budget workshops. We were extremely aggressive in our budgeting. And an example of that's on the screen with the golf rounds. Eric initially, when he projected his rounds, assumed that when the grass starts to turn on the golf course, the month of March, he thought, golf rounds would go down, maybe not as many as guest rounds because of the conditions. But this year on the tee sheet, we had 50 to 100 people on the wait list every day. So we went aggressive and we said, okay, we think we can still fill the tee sheet all the way through March. That's what I mean by aggressive. If it was a normal year where we didn't have these type of inflation and wage impacts, I would have been more conservative along with Eric and said, let's scale back some of these golf rounds. But we didn't do that. The other is, as I mentioned before, if wages continue to rise, that's something we're going to have to adjust as we go. I have a quote on there. This is over a month old, so a lot changes in a month, but from fortune.com, that if the inflation continued as it was, COLA for 2023 could be 10.8%. But again, thankfully, that 9.1 CPI went down to 8.5. So, gas isn't $5 a gallon anymore. So let's just hope that continues. So what does this all come down to? I have a handout that I'll give you all after the meeting, and we'll put this up on the website. I know it's a little bit hard to read on screen, but this is a breakdown of all of the departments. And to kind of summarize it for you, I'm not sure if you see I don't think you'll see my mouse, but our common area maintenance budget is going up by 5.6%. Common area maintenance is the master base assessment line item in your dues. It's basically all the operating expenses that are not club dues. So we have the master base assessment, which is primarily taken care of gate access, common area maintenance, and the big one now is hot wire because it has the bulk service TV and internet. So that goes up 5.6. The net effect of golf operations, so both of these areas, so that's Eric's budget and Mark's, is an increase of 14.4%, mostly driven by the $135,000 that I mentioned before. Food and beverage has a big impact because of inflation and payroll. The total subsidy on food and beverage is a difference of 12%. Tennis and fitness is essentially flat. Maintenance and utilities is a big increase at 15.5%. But that's actually more reflective of what our actual expenses are this year. From actual this year, we really haven't increased anything. In fact, again, we were pretty aggressive in some of our budgeting. General and administrative, our admin budget is 4%. So what does all that come down to? Why you're here and why you're online is the resulting dues increase. So you can see and again, this will be in the handout, the club dues, an increase of $480, that's 8.7%. The master base assessment against that's that CAM budget, common area maintenance, 5.6. We have a small increase on the service charge. Again, a lot of the wages for the service staff come from that, so we bumped that up $20 or 3.4%. The capital reserve assessment goes up 5% for a total of $684 or 7.2% total increase. Now, the one thing you don't see here, obviously, is the payment on the renovation, the repayment on the renovation from the last renovation, and depending on what happens with this vote. It's not on there because we don't know what's going to happen yet. It's out to a vote. It'll be right about this time, 2 weeks from now, that we'll know the results of that. So that will be known before the board has your meeting to approve this budget on the 26th, and then we can adjust accordingly. So that takes care of the renovation piece. But operationally, what if the budget doesn't get approved? Well, I'm sorry, what if the renovation doesn't get approved? So first off, most of the line items will not be impacted by whether or not there is a renovation. The biggest impact is the one that I mentioned before, the $135,000 of additional subsidy. So if there is no renovation, that additional subsidy comes back as, call it a savings. But if we're not closed in 2023 and there's no renovation work occurring, that $135,000 would be significantly offset by other expenses that we did not have to budget. Not necessarily in order, because pool repair and maintenance isn't a huge line item, but janitorial, obviously, because of now we would have the bistro open. Utilities would be different because of the operations and so forth. So bottom line, the budget would remain relatively flat to the proposed budget if we were to do no renovations at all. So obviously that's a pretty significant increase, and I've been hearing from all of our peer clubs that a lot of clubs are facing a 10% north or south of that increase. So the Florida chapter of the Club Management Association actually did a survey just recently, and they found that 48% of the clubs are anticipating at least a 10% increase in dues. And while, every club deals with labor challenges and inflation, not all these clubs are dealing with renovations. So that's an added twist for us. The capital budget. So every year we have a capital budget that's approved along with the operation budget by the board. You see the top section is our leases. These are the annual costs of these leases, primarily driven by golf course maintenance equipment and the golf cart lease. That's about $367,000. We have some other allotments, landscape replacement. That's not related to renovation, but an annual allotment for replacing landscape past its useful life. Small wares front and back of the house, so that's food and beverage. Computer equipment at $5,000. Also, there was an irrigation pump that was on the capital reserve list for fiscal 22 that we're deferring to next year because the pump is still functioning. And ideally, we would replace that pump when the golf course is first being torn up, so that we don't have any downtime. Mark has also requested the replacement of a fertilizer spreader. So you see those capital items coming out to $86,000, plus the leases brings us to a total of $453,000 coming from being used from the master capital reserves. From the resale fund, we only have one item. Food and beverages requested some additional small wares, new items such as buffet equipment, china, and so forth. That's $15,000. This was published with an update that I sent out on, I think it was Monday. It's just a breakdown, a chart breakdown that tells you what the expense was and the loan term on the original renovation in 2013, what was proposed last November that the members voted on, and then what the revised proposal is that's out to a vote right now. That takes me to Q&A. I received a couple of questions in advance, so I'm going to tackle those first. And these were specific to reserves, the reserve accounts. And the question was, how much money does the Stonebridge have in reserves, not counting the $2 million contributed to the construction fund? Thankfully, because it was submitted in advance, I had the chance to prepare for that, so I'll read my response. Currently, there is $1.2 million in master reserves and $350,000 in resale reserves. The $2 million for the renovation is coming from the master reserves. Through the end of July of this year, we have expensed $425,000 on the renovation costs. Next month, once the board has approved the fiscal 23, the 23 budget, we will bill the members for the fiscal 23 annual capital reserve assessment, which will add $1.15 million to the master reserves. The projected balance of the master reserve will then be $775,000, taking into account the full use of the $2 million allocated for the renovation. Other question was, in general, how has Stonebridge managed the reserves over the years? So the answer to that is the use of the reserve funds is through board approval, either as part of the capital budget approval, which they'll be doing in a couple of weeks, or by board resolution at a board meeting. The only exception to that is when the GM approves necessary and unbudgeted capital expenditures less than $10,000. Next question is, how does the club place the funds in an interest-bearing account, or does the Stonebridge board manage these funds? And if so, does the board use a financial advisor? If an advisor, which is used? The answer to that is master reserves are kept in what's called an ICS, an insured cash sweep, which earns a nominal amount of interest, but ensures that all the money is protected by the FDIC because the money is swept into a network of banks to stay below the FDIC fully insured threshold. I hope that answers those questions. I'll look online to see if we have any. When does fiscal year start? All right, softball. Fiscal year starts October 1st. I don't see any others online. What about from the audience? And it ends September 30, if that's the next question. So.
Okay. On your early slide, you talked about the three major variables.
Yeah, maybe come on up, just so it picks up online.
Okay, I'm Rob Ford. I'm on the Finance Committee, and I should know the answer to this question. On your early slide, you showed the three major variables of the golf course, the inflation, and you came out with a statement that the total value was $550,000 or $680 per member.
Yeah.
Okay. In the analysis where you showed the actual cost increases, I think the total came out to about $480. Perhaps you could go back to those slides. No, forward, go on from that.
This one?
No, that one. 684. But included in there are things like the reserve assessment, which I think was probably not included in those three variables you had. If you take out that, you're about 614 compared to 680. Is there a reconciliation possibly for you, Donna? Is it purely comparing broad brush numbers with more detailed numbers of the differences?
Well, it's aggressive budgeting, like I said. I mean, obviously, and that's what I wanted to show. The increase just in those four line items exceeds the operational increase. So the only way to make that up is through being aggressive.
Yeah.
Looking at every line item, seeing where we can cut and trim, hitting up vendors, seeing where we could scale things back. And payroll is our biggest expense, seeing where we could tighten the screws on that as well. So okay. You can see that we've made up that difference.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? Mr. Gett?
Jim Gett.
When you showed the slide about the budget, that does not reflect the renovation, should that not go forward, God forbid. It basically was, it gives me the impression that whether we do the renovation or not, obviously that impacts payment of an assessment.
Yeah.
But from an operational budget standpoint, it's not an impact.
Exactly.
For that particular, this coming fiscal year, right?
Correct.
So it's just basically inflation and labor increases and things like that. So we would see, in effect, if we weren't doing a renovation, if that wasn't anything on the roadmap right now, we'd be seeing that kind of change anyway.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. Thanks.
Any other questions? Let's see if there's anything else online. Let's see anything else online. Just for clarity.
Hey, Jim. Tim, I have two questions, two subjects. The first one on hot wire. You touched it. There's an increase for the club in the hot wire.
Yeah.
What percentage was that? Do you remember?
This year, so in the first year, it was significant because remember, we had those 6 months free. This year, there was a slight reduction in the first year of the full payment. So now we're into the cycle of what our new payment will be. I think it comes out to about 5, remember, like 5.2 or 5.4. Going forward, fiscal year 24 and beyond, it'll be 4% for another 2 years, and then the remainder of the contract will be 3%.
No, that's for the club.
That's for, well, for everybody.
Okay, because I believe my deal started September 1 and was guaranteed for 2 years. So I haven't gotten a September bill yet, but I would assume my personal bill, not the club.
Yeah, I can't speak to, so this is just the bulk services
Right.
that the club pays for the bulk services you get at home. Now, I don't know, the ancillary services that you have.
May go up.
They may, yeah, that has nothing to do with this budget. So I'm not sure what, I know they did some contractual specials up front to guarantee certain pricing for a year or two, but that would not be reflected in this.
My second topic was the reserves. I understood your screen on the capital reserves and the resale. But in past meetings from the finance committee, we've always gotten on the screenshot of all the reserve accounts. I believe the mitigation reserve there's 2 others, isn't there?
There's a risk mitigation, which is about 415,000.
That's where we put the PPP money.
Well, PPP money was used to keep the staff on board. And the net effect of that operational year did go into the risk mitigation.
I thought last year you said that 800 we got from PPP, 500 was spent, and we put 4 something in the mitigation fund.
Well, I wouldn't look at it that way because the 876,000
Right.
was fully expensed on payroll. The net effect of that operating year was favorable, but all of the money was spent on payroll as it was.
But what amount do we transfer into the risk mitigation?
Three
something.
Yeah, 340, somewhere in there.
And is there a fourth reserve?
Just be
So it's only those 3 accounts?
Yeah, just risk mitigation, resale, and the master reserve.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody asked if there was a rainy day fund. Unfortunately, we don't have a rainy day fund. I would love it if we did, but we don't, so. Just not raining money, that's all. Well, if there's no more questions, I don't see any more online. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Hi, my name's Tom.
No, that's me.